everyone. Anytime you're ready, Paul.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Miller. I'm a senior comm major here at the university, affectionately known as that guy who likes to talk a lot in class. I also recently got the title of class dad in one of my other periods. But funny nicknames aside, I'd like to talk to you all today about the gender wage gap. So I think this is really important because it's relevant and timely. Discussions about gender discrimination and sexism towards females is really prominent in the social discourse right now. So I think there's a lot of utility from being, I'm trying to think, relatively informed about this issue. Not everyone has to be a specialist, but if you're going to engage on it, it's good to have your ducks in a row at least. So when I was designing this poster, my goal, not so much visually, but rhetorically, was to promote a more engaged, critical dialogue about the wage gap. This is a problem that I think can only be solved if it's properly identified, and right now I think that it's misidentified, namely because there's issues with what's called univariability. So this quote that you'll see up here in this section right there, a woman earns 79 cents for every dollar a man earns. And then the narrative is differences in gender, differences in wage, sexism. There's a great study that what's the word I'm looking for, illustrates this point. It was a study that came out that showed a 0.88 correlation between egg consumption and traffic accidents. So 0.88 correlation, that's really, really high. And that's the type of correlation that, depending on who's looking at it, someone could easily be tempted to say, well, eggs cause people to crash their vehicles. Now, while I'm not willing to entirely dismiss that yet, I'm also not willing to give up my breakfast omelet just yet, even if it does put me in danger, apparently. So my research question when I was designing this was, if it's not gender that causes the wage gap, well then, what causes it? And most of my data in looking for an answer came from a 2009 study from the US Department of Labor Statistics that looked at 50 peer-reviewed studies. And their conclusion was that the wage gap, quote, may be almost entirely the result of individual choices made by both male and female workers. So, for example, in the nursing field, male nurses are paid approximately 18% more than female nurses, and this is for a couple of different reasons. One, they work longer hours on average, which is not accounted for when calculating the wage gap. The wage gap only looks at median wages based on full-time workers. Male nurses are more likely to relocate, so they have more flexibility. So if they have multiple job offers in multiple areas, they are more likely to discriminate in favor of the highest paying of those options, even if it's farther away. And male nurses gravitate towards higher paying specialties at higher rates than women do. And we can see this both reflected within professions, so in nursing specialties, and also reflected in terms of career choice in general. And just to kind of illustrate that point, if you look at my top graph, this is the percentage of college students who are male in the top 5 highest paying majors. So that means if you took 100 students who were all majoring in petroleum engineering, 87 of those students would be male. So if you look at these 5 categories, which are the 5 highest paying majors, men occupy them by a large margin in 4 out of 5 categories. Conversely, if you look at the 5 lowest paying majors, women occupy them at higher rates than men in all 5 categories. So this kind of reinforces the idea that the wage gap is a result of individual choices rather than sexism. So I think this is important to emphasize because, from a dialogue perspective, because like regardless of political or social affiliation, it's really important to be critical of the information you consume and also be informed about the source that it's coming from. Because all of this information is already out there, and a lot of it is already presented in various venues, so like interviews and news sources, but it's either cherry-picked and certain information is emphasized over others or information is omitted, or it's framed in a specific way to suit whatever the narrative may be of the source. And we talked a little bit about some of those biases in the egg example. So I would be, trying to think how to say this, I would be hesitant if you ever see a comparison that says a rise in A accompanies a rise in B, therefore a rise in A causes a rise in B. Because that's how we get headlines like scrambled eggs linked to front-end collisions, that kind of thing. I made that up, that's not an actual headline, but it could be. So, listen, I really appreciate your all's time and attention. This is an issue that I think needs to be talked about. It's important, no doubt. But I think if we're going to treat any social ills, we first have to properly diagnose them. Thank you.